All right, so here is a little chart density update. So in the last video, I was talking about how I'm working on, this would be called maybe it's a UI mock-up. We can just imagine it looking really pretty, but what we're really trying to do is kind of force the logical model into the data model and the functionality. And as I said in the last video, most of these things are all components of K2. So apart from data set, which is really just a wrapper on a stat bucket, everything here almost, well, not everything, but all of the major objects here exist in K2. And so what I had to do is kind of change the model just a little bit so that each data set has its own contact group, which is kind of in the back end. You won't see that. And then when you associate contacts with the data set, you're actually associating with the contact group that's associated with that data set. Same thing with alerting. You have a priority group which kind of defines your alert priorities and what happens when one of those alerts is triggered. So instead of having just one for the user, we're going to have one for each data set. That makes more sense. And I think that's what users would ultimately want. We're still going to hide the actual priority group behind the data set, and they'll just see the alert priorities for the data set. So when they click on a data set, they'll have on the settings there something that says alert priorities, and they'll be able to define the attributes of those alert priorities for the data set. So I had to rewrite my tests, and one of the things I thought about why this is helpful is as you write your tests, you start to discover ways to make things simpler already before you get into the UI. Because once you get into the UI, if you make a change on the back end, then it can facilitate changes on the front end, and those can be harder to test. This is a lot easier to test when it's all in code. Now, one thing I've learned from having to try to port an application that I've already over and to a newer version of K2 is that I really want as few points of contact between the UI and the back end as possible. And so there's going to probably be a layer of abstraction on top of this, which is just the UI interface. So if something here changes, I can still kind of test it through the UI interface, and as long as that works, the UI will still work, most likely. But finding, all the things that you changed, if you're not keeping everything up to date, can be difficult. So we're going to probably have a layer of abstraction between the UI and even the application code. And ultimately, the idea, not in version 1, but is for everything to be RESTful, so that if we wanted to, somebody could just turn this into a service and use components of it. And the reason for that is since, as I stated in the last video, I'm not a great UI developer, and I'm not sure that Oracle Apex is the best platform for UIs. It's great for a lot of things, especially internal, but I don't know that it's as capable or as slick looking as a lot of I don't know that you would design like the I don't know. I don't have an example. You know what I'm talking about, hopefully. But maybe it'll get there. But since if you have a product that you're developing and it starts to grow and you get to the point where you can afford to hire UI developers, you might want to say, hey, here's what I've done. Please go do this in I don't want to say modern tools, but in other tools, and the API, the RESTful API is all there, so all you have to do is interact with that. Now, if I really wanted to force myself to do this, I would do that as I develop the UI. I would only use the RESTful interface. I don't think I'm willing to do that for version 1. That's too much work. We're not trying to do anything but get it out the door, but we need to be thinking about that. So these tests, one thing is this version of the tests are a lot cleaner than the last version because I'm using one key now to identify a contact group, an alert priority group. They all have the same key, which makes things just a little easier. Some of the things I've changed already in K2. I've made some updates, and I'll push those later because I still have things I want to change. But you're starting to see as you write these tests and they fail, and they fail because you don't have the right name for something, it pulls out that I'm not always being consistent in my naming. Sometimes I'm trying to be brief, and so you might have, here you have priority group ID for an alert priority group, whereas in other places, if I was doing that, it might been called, alert priority group ID. But if you try to do that too much, then it gets really complicated. And when you start to like join two things together in a table, so you've got a key from here and a key from there, and you want to make a call to that, but you've shortened it to just say, key or p key, or I'm sorry, or like object key, and if your interface is just p key. Well, now you have to change, when you do that call, you're going to have p object name, object type dot key or something, or underscore key. And it gets confusing and it's inconsistent. So I see some areas where I can improve consistency. And like I said, it's a lot better to do it now. So I do recommend you kind of develop your application this way. If you're a solo developer like me, if you're on a team, of course, do it whatever way the team will. But if I was building a team, I would push this also. So we want to develop the app as far as we can go in code before we start the UI. Our UI then kind of does this, which drives more code and tests, and then it won't be too long before we start firing up the UI and we're ready to kind of interact with what we've built here. So that's all I've got. Thanks for following along.